Hey guys, welcome back to Dogforge. My name's Paul, and in this installment of the tier list series, we'll be taking a look at the feats presented to us in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Now, as always, I will have reference material off to the side to make sure I'm not misremembering and hopefully not misreading anything as we go through. We'll be using the regular tier maker site as we progress through this, and if you want to do this for yourself, you just do a little quick search under the Dungeons & Dragons category. You should find the templates I made for this series popping up. So let's get cracking on into it. First up, we're going to have Artificer Initiate. This is going to be both, and just the regular disclaimer is that we're evaluating stuff not just based on their mechanical effectiveness, but also based on how well they achieve the fiction that the feat is going for. This is going to be fiction-wise trying to give you a hint of that Artificer, so more like an Artificer's Apprentice rather than the full-blown thing. This is going to give us three main benefits. The first one being that you learn a cantrip and first level spell of your choice from the Artificer spell list. The spellcasting ability for it will be Intelligence, and you can cast that spell once per long rest for free before you have to use spell slots to cast it again. And you gain proficiency with one type of artisan tools of your choice that you can then use as a spellcasting focus for any spell that uses Intelligence as its spellcasting ability. So, straight out the bat, this is not something that an Artificer is likely going to want to take, and it might be weird that I'm saying that, but quite often something that is Initiate or Adept, something that gives you a taste of what another class can do, or subclass, is often a actual reasonable pick for the thing they're borrowing from, because it just makes them better at what they're originally doing. Now, this is going to give an Artificer more cantrips, which, particularly if you're a Battlesmith, grabbing, mending, it can be a little bit restrictive on cantrips to begin with. It's going to give you an additional casting, which as a mostly half caster, I personally classify them as 3/4 caster, can be great as their progression can be a bit slow. But the artisan tools, it's a bit you're already going to get most of the ones that you want. If you want to grab more and more of them, then maybe that's good, but you can already use it as a spellcasting focus. So this is mostly going to be for somebody that wants to grab some hint of Artificer to mix in with whatever they're doing. Now, I will say that because the Artificer spell list is such a hybrid of Arcane and, I guess nowadays you would call it Primal, you do get this kind of mix of spells that you could take that you might not be able to get from a feat otherwise. That could be quite useful. In terms of how well it establishes and fulfills the fiction of being an Artificer Initiate, I think it does that pretty well. It basically makes you feel like a level 0 Artificer in some ways. I don't think the spellcasting with your tool is really going to be useful, if at all, for non-Artificer characters, and Artificers already can do it. So you get a cantrip, and I'm going to put this as C. I feel like this could have done a little bit more, or to be honest, it could have even just been a half feat. You're only getting a first level spell and one cantrip, and I don't feel that artisan tools and using your artisan tool as a spellcasting focus is really enough to warrant a whole feat. Like I said, there are some situations where you might want access to the Artificer spell list because it is a hybrid, and that's what's keeping this from a D. It could be useful for some, and it does strongly fulfill the fiction, but it's not a feat I'm really impressed with. Next up we have Chef, which is a half feat boosting Con or Wisdom by +1. Gives you proficiency with cook's utensils if you don't already have it, and as part of a short rest you can cook special food provided you have ingredients and cook utensils on hand. You can prepare enough of this food for a number of creatures equal to 4 plus your proficiency bonus, so starting off at 6, topping out at 10. And at the end of a short rest, any creature who eats this food and spends 1 or more hit dice regains an extra 1d8 hit points. So this is basically like a Bard Song of Rest, but with extra steps. However, it is going to be a d8 right off of the bat, which is quite nice. And finally, with 1 hour of work, when you finish a long rest, you can cook a number of treats equal to your proficiency bonus. These special treats last 8 hours. When a creature uses a bonus action to eat one of these treats, they gain 10 hit points equal to your proficiency bonus. So, I think when people think of this feat, they're mostly thinking of either the fiction or the temporary hit points. The fiction, it fulfills really well. Both Constitution and Wisdom kind of make sense for cooking, and I like that it gives you more than just one option. If this was just Wisdom, it would still be good, but I like that it offers Constitution for those that might want it. Cook's utensils, there are some additional rules regarding them in Xanathars, and I like that it is actually providing you with the proficiency. The Song of Rest alternative is also quite nice, and depending on the type of game and party you have, it can be quite valuable. But the 10 hit points. So it's a bonus action to eat one of these magical cookies. They're not actually magical, but they gotta be damn good if they're giving you 10 HP. But temporary hit points equal to your proficiency bonus is, in a word, not good. This is going to start off at a 2 and get as much as a 6, and at no point is it going to feel like a lot or adequate. I would rather have seen this be equal to your proficiency bonus plus the modifier raised by this feat. I think that would have been much more impactful. As it is, it's kind of like, yeah, you may as well make them if you have this feat, but they're not really going to be having that much of an impact on your actual hit point totals. I think this is something that is a ribbon that people might get attached to. It's a bonus action, so I guess it could be like an emergency top-up in combat if that character doesn't have anything better to use their bonus action on. But if I were you, I would primarily take this for the +1 to Con or Wisdom and the Song of Rest alternative. I think those are the main attractors of this feat. I think that the fiction is strong, and I think this is a pretty middle-of-the-road feat just because that temp HP ability, which otherwise would have made this feat more generally usable, is just too weak to really push this to an A. If you're looking for a homebrew fix, I think just adding the modifier you raise with this feat would be adequate to make it at least somewhat more worthwhile. But I'm sure lots of people take this feat and have a lot of fun with it. Next up we have Crusher. That's going to increase Strength or Con by +1, and it's going to give you 2 effects. First one is going to be once per turn when you hit a creature with an attack that deals bludgeoning damage, you can move it 5 feet to an unoccupied space, provided the target is no more than one size larger than you. And the other feature is going to trigger on a critical hit that deals bludgeoning damage. Attack rolls against that creature are made with advantage until the start of your next turn. So, the primary reason why you should take this feat is for the ability to move them. You can't rely on getting crits, that's just a nice bonus. Increasing your strength or constitution makes sense, seeing as most bludgeoning weapons are actually going to be strength only, with the notable exception of the sling. Now, there are some ways that you could stretch this outside of just a martial using something like a hammer. Most notably, the Genie Warlock has an option for adding additional damage. That one of the options, I think Genie allows it to do bludgeoning damage. So you could do things like an Eldritch Blast that has additional movement besides just the invocation control that you add onto it. I think this is a great feat. It's a half feat that adds basically at will control to martials. It adds a lot of depth to martials that I feel like the game was kind of missing outside of like specific subclasses before. The fact that it's a half feat makes it easy for most people that want to take it to take it. And I think that the critical hit thing is interesting enough that when you get a crit, you'll be just that little bit more excited. So I think this is a good feat. This is definitely worthy of being A. I don't think it's quite S tier, but it is certainly a very good feat. Next up we have Eldritch Adept. So this has a prerequisite. You're going to need to be able to have the spellcasting or pact magic feature. So This is important. Spellcasting is a feature, not just a general thing. If you have the ability to cast a spell from another feat, from a race or anything like that, or you have spellcasting from features that just let you cast spells, that is not good enough. It has to be the spellcasting feature or pact magic, which means that some classes are just completely out of luck and others can only take this if they multiclass or take certain subclasses. So this allows you to learn one Eldritch Invocation option from the Warlock class. The spellcasting ability, if the invocation requires it, is your choice of Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. You choose when you get the feat. If the invocation has a prerequisite of any kind, you can only choose that invocation if you have a Warlock that also meets that prerequisite. So when you gain a level, you can also replace this invocation with another one. This is going to be great for Warlocks, actually. There are certainly times where you could benefit from more invocations as a Warlock, especially if your build is a little bit invocation hungry. This can certainly be the case with things like Bladelocks, and with additional invocations brought in for the... basically every kind of pact got more invocations in Tasha's. It can certainly make you want more than you actually have. So I think this is great for Warlocks. In terms of what you might want to take otherwise with this, I think that something like Fiendish Vigor, which is at will being able to cast False Life, that's pretty good. Devil Sight, 120 feet, being able to see in magical and non-magical darkness, that's very good. I think this is potentially a very good feat that can add some real utility and ability to your character, or bolster a Warlock. However, the prerequisite of spellcasting or the pact magic feature, I feel, is a little bit needlessly restrictive. Especially since it doesn't really make sense. The fiction of this, if it's based on the Warlock, is, as stated in the feat, studying occult lore, you learn one thing. I don't see a reason to restrict it to this. It would be better if it was just the ability to cast one spell, but even then I don't see a real need to restrict it that hard. And it's that restriction that is going to see it thrown into the B tier, even though there is quite a lot of potential with getting an invocation. Next up we have Fey Touched. This is going to be a half feat that boosts either Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma by +1, and it's going to give you the Misty Step and one first level of spell of your choice from Divination or Enchantment. And then you can cast each of those once per long rest for free, and then you can use a spell slot whenever you want to cast them otherwise. The spellcasting ability is whatever you raised with this feat. There's really no way about it. This is either A or S tier. I'm gonna have to lean S tier just because this gives you so much. Misty Step is an incredibly valuable spell. Being able to bonus action teleport is great. The fact that it actually gives you the spell in addition to the free casting is very good. Getting a first level spell can be a little bit swingy depending on what you choose, but something like I think you can take Command with this would be quite nice. That's more flexible to your character build, but the fact that you get all of that along with a +1 to a mental stat, which if you're a spellcaster you need, if you're any kind of Hastcaster or third caster you need, and even if you're none of those things, you probably want sometimes. This is just a great feat and is kind of putting the writing on the wall for its fellow touched sibling down the line. Fighting Initiate. This has a prerequisite of needing proficiency with a martial weapon, and it gives you a fighting style of your choice from the fighter class. It's worth noting that Tasha's also introduced more fighting styles. Whenever you get an ASI, you can replace the fighting style you get from this with a different one from the fighter's class. Now it is specifying fighter class, which is all fighting styles, including fighter exclusive ones, but it does not include Blessed Warrior or whatever the Ranger equivalent is, which gives them cantrips. This is potentially a strong option because it allows you to add stuff like archery onto certain builds that might not otherwise have it, without having to dip into fighter, which would probably be the easiest way. And it also allows something like a fighter who has a fighting style already but also has a lot of ASIs to double dip in fighting styles without having to be a champion and waiting till like level 10. So this has a lot of potential. I don't understand why this is a feat without an ability increase. If Fey Touched can exist with a mental boost, then this should exist with a +1 to a physical stat. I see no balance justification for it, and I think it would lean into the fiction perfectly well. In terms of fiction, being a fighting initiate, getting a fighting style, makes sense. But this is going to be a B tier just because it is an ASI, a feat, if you're getting it through Variant Human or Custom Lineage or a DM boon, however you're getting it. An entire feat just for a fighting style is kind of expensive in a world where if you're not a fighter, you can just dip fighter for 1 level, in which case you're getting potentially proficiencies, you're getting the fighting style you want, and you're also getting second wind. So it's a bit of a hard sell, but there is a lot of potential there. So like Eldritch Adept, it's just being held back from its real potential. Next up we have Gunner, the boomier version of Crossbow Expert, it seems like. So this is tied to firearms, but it doesn't necessarily require you to use a firearm. And so it can actually be a solid choice for some characters in games that don't even use guns, provided that your DM lets you take it. So it's a half feat, letting you boost your dexterity by +1. Dexterity, a score that everybody benefits from, and the only people that really don't get quite as much out of it being those that use heavy armor. You gain proficiency with firearms. If your DM allows it, you ignore the loading property of firearms, which allows you to fire more than once per turn, similar to how Crossbow Expert lets you do that with a crossbow. And being within 5 feet of a hostile creature doesn't impose disadvantage on ranged attacks. Now, where this is useful is that Crossbow Expert also has this, and this can be useful for people that use, say, the stereotypical Warlock build, which is Eldritch Blast and Hex. That can be easily, hindered or shut down by people closing and getting disadvantage on those Eldritch Blast rays. This mitigates that, but unlike Crossbow Expert, where if you're taking it just for that reason, the rest of the feat is kind of dead to you, you do still get a +1 dexterity, which is pretty nice. So the fiction here is making you good with guns. It gives you gun proficiency, loading property, ignoring, increases dexterity, which you'd use to fire guns, and makes you better at doing the John Woo gun fu kind of deal. I think it fulfills the fiction. I think there's enough here to make it a pretty good feat. However, I think that the firearm thing is niche enough that this is going to be a B. The dexterity and ignoring disadvantage within 5 feet of a hostile with a ranged attack are great, but without being able to rely on using guns, this just doesn't warrant higher than a B. Metamagic Adept. Can you guess what this does? Now this is also using a prerequisite of spellcasting or pact magic. Again, I feel this is a bit too restrictive, seeing as there are a lot of ways that you can get the ability to cast spells outside of those. Although I do understand it a bit more than Eldritch Adept, and so I won't be quite as harsh on it for that reason. This lets you learn 2 metamagic options of your choice from the Sorcerer class. Again, bear in mind that Tasha's Cauldron of Everything did add additional options. And it lets you use one of them on a spell when you cast it, unless the option says otherwise. Now, same rules that you would apply as a sorcerer. You also gain 2 sorcery points to spend on metamagic. These points are added to any sorcery points you have from another source, but can be used only on metamagic. You regain all spent sorcery points when you finish a long rest. So, one of the parts in there where it adds all your sorcery points to existing pool, that's if you take this as a sorcerer. That's good. That is how it should be. It's kind of like how a martial adept should add the superiority die to what you get as a battlemaster. However, restricting this to just meta magic only kind of makes sense within the fiction of it being meta magic adept. However, just on a practical matter, it is a pain in the butt to keep track of that, because you are in a position where you can add it to your pool for the purposes of meta magic, but you then have to track that separately if you want to create spell slots out of your sorcery points. So you just have to track it separately anyway. That's a needless restriction. That is needless bookkeeping that it's pushing on the player. And between that and the overly restrictive prerequisite, I'm not particularly fond of this. Now, there are some very potent meta magics that you can get, like Quickened and Twinned. So, this is potentially quite good. I would say that the best use case for this, really, is if you are already a sorcerer, or if you are a multi-class that has sorcerer levels in it. For example, it's quite popular to play, a Sorkadin, a sorcerer paladin mix, primarily so that you can use sorcerer to bump the amount of times that you can smite or increase your aura or whatever. This would be quite good because, obviously, just like a monk with their key points, by multiclassing out of sorcerer or multiclassing into sorcerer, you are sacrificing sorcery points, and this would be a level-based way for you to increase your pool. That is the ideal use for this, either on a straight sorcerer or on a sorcerer multiclass that has gone at least 3 deep. Between the nicheness of this, the restrictions, the bookkeeping, I'm going to put this in C, just because it's a high C, it's almost a B, but there's just too much dragging this feat down for me to really justify putting it alongside Eldritch Adept, which is, out of the two of them, just a better feat, in my opinion. Next up we have Piercer. This is another, similar to Crusher. You're going to be able to boost Strength or Dexterity. Now that's being able to boost either of those is quite nice. Once per turn, when you hit a creature that deals piercing damage, you can re-roll one of the attack's damage dice. You must use the new roll. So this is effectively improving your average damage. And when you score a crit that does piercing damage, you roll an extra dice. So basically, if you roll a crit with a dagger, instead of 2d4, you roll 3d4. That kind of thing. I like this because it's a half feat that you can easily slot into the progression. It's obviously not as powerful or generally applicable as Crusher, but it does let you boost Dexterity as well, which is a more powerful feat if you focus on that versus Strength. The ability to crit harder could be nice situationally, especially since this would work with something like a Elven Accuracy based build, where you could be using Super Advantage, effectively rolling 3 d20s per turn on your attacks per attack. You're going to be critting more often naturally when you're rolling more d20s, and this means that you can potentially be dealing significantly more damage over the lifespan of your character just by adding that extra dice here and there. It's also fun just to make crits more impactful. I'm going to put this as a B. I do really like this. I do recommend this. If you can slot this into your progression as a user of a piercing weapon, I think it is very much worthwhile. I just don't think it's quite worthy of hanging out with Crusher. Next up we have Poisoner, who is trying to make the valiant effort to make poisoning more worthwhile. Now when you take this feat, you're going to be able to ignore resistance to poison damage when you make damage rolls that deal poison. Notably, this does not specify actually making or using poison. It can apply to spells that deal poison, so bear that in mind. You can also apply a poison to a weapon or piece of ammunition as a bonus action instead of an action, making it far more usable to do so. And finally, you gain proficiency with Poisoner Kit if you don't already have it. And by using a poisoning kit for an hour and spending 50 gold worth of materials, which can be a lot depending on what your level is, you can create a number of doses of potent poison equal to your proficiency bonus. Once applied to a weapon, it remains potent for 1 minute or until you hit with the weapon or ammunition. When the creature takes damage from a coated weapon or ammunition, it makes a DC 14 Constitution save, or it takes 2d8 poison and becomes poisoned until the end of your next turn. So this is giving you a better poison than the PHB version without having to delve into the DMG. It's making it easier to use poison, but it is effectively asking that you commit your bonus action to this, which depending on what your build is might not be viable. The 50 gold is kind of understandable. One interesting thing to note is that it says how long this takes to make, how long it remains potent once applied. However, it doesn't give an expiry for the poison in general. So what you can do is kind of grind away in some downtime, or you could spend potentially a couple hours during a long rest, maybe even, and just build up like a supply of poison. The thing that I really don't like about this is that it still doesn't address poison immunity, which is still going to be a fairly prevalent problem depending what you're fighting. I would like to see it downgrade immunity to resistance, and I would also like to see the cost come down a bit, and instead of it costing this much, just have like an expiry of the next long rest or something. 50 gold is a lot. And because it's tied to your proficiency bonus, I can't really recommend this as a first level feat. If you're, again, Variant Human, custom lineage, getting a feat from your DM or the campaign, I don't recommend it because you're only going to be getting 2 doses, and it's going to cost you a significant amount of money for your level. So I would really recommend this in tier 3 and beyond. It does make poison more useful. It does live up to the fiction of being a poisoner. And it does potentially do okay. It is only a DC 14 con save. Con is typically a fairly good save for monsters. And it is worth noting that it ignores resistance to poison for the damage, but it would still have advantage on the saving throw to avoid being poisoned. So, with all of that in mind, I'm going to put this as a B. I think this could definitely be tweaked to be more effective, but as it stands, middle of the road, worth taking, but nothing exceptional. Next up we have Shadow Touched, which is the shadowy cousin of Fey Touched. You get to increase your Int, Wisdom, or Charisma again by +1. You learn Invisibility and a first level spell of your choice that has to be either Illusion or Necromancy. Again, whatever the spellcasting feature ability for this is whatever you boosted with this feat. And you can cast each of those spells once per long rest, but you can also cast them with any spell slots you may have. This is also just going to go up here in S tier. Invisibility is a great spell. Some people fall into the trap of thinking that invisibility is a combat spell, which it does help in combat with you getting the first thing that you do effectively as advantage if you're attacking, or being able to cast a spell without the risk of being counterspelled, stuff like that. But it's primarily an exploration or potentially a social pillar kind of thing. Being able to cast it once for free per long rest is the kind of thing that really shapes a character, where, especially if you choose an illusion spell to go along with this, where you find that you're just able to interact with the world differently. It's kind of like when you play a monk and you have that enhanced movement speed that you just kind of think about things differently. It's the same kind of thing when you have a spell like invisibility just on tap every day. So I will say I think Fey Touched is a bit better, but Shadow Touched is also a strong option. And if you wanted to, Necromancy gives you some options for the first level spell as well. You could grab something like False Life to give yourself a little bit of temp HP as well. So yeah, I like it. Next up we have Skill Expert. That's going to be a half feat that lets you increase any ability score of your choice by +1. I really like the flexibility. You get to gain proficiency in one skill of your choice, and similar to Prodigy from our previous video, you get to choose one skill that you have proficiency with and gain expertise in that skill. So you get to double your proficiency bonus for checks with it, as long as it's not already benefiting from a feature that already doubles your proficiency. So this is excellent. This is kind of what Prodigy wanted to be. Like, you want a skill monkey feat, you want something to give you more skills, get expertise outside of class features or on top of class features. But it's also hard to justify that sometimes, especially if you have lower stats or you feel like you need to keep your stats at a +4, +5 pace. Being able to boost something by +1, being able to boost anything of your choice by +1, makes this much easier to fit in, and it makes it much more suitable for the fiction of being a versatile skill expert. I think this is a very good feat. I think a skill and expertise in exchange for a +1 is well worth it. I think that given the gamut that skills range, and the fact that there are some skills like perception and stealth that are kind of universally used across tables, I think that this warrants an S. I think it's a potentially weaker S tier, but I do think it is worth S in this situation. Our final weapon damage dealing feat is Slasher, which lets you increase your strength or dex by +1, ability to boost your dex again, quite nice. Once per turn, when you hit a creature with this attack and it deals slashing damage, you can reduce that target's speed by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. So similar to Crusher, we've got a little bit of control here. Reducing speed by 10 feet is fairly significant. It can really constrict a monster's ability to move around the battlefield. I would say that this really helps with tanking in terms of like controlling the battlefield, keeping stuff on you or near you very well. And if you are working together as a team to keep like certain distances in mind to limit the chance of these slowed creatures getting to your party members, I think this could be quite good. And when you score a critical hit that deals slashing damage, you grievously wound it until the start of your next turn. The target has disadvantage in all attacks. So a nice debuff to go along with a crit. That's quite nice, and an effect we haven't seen yet from the other weapon ones. I think that this is slightly weaker than Crusher. I think being able to move creatures is more powerful than reducing their speed. Particularly since that you could move them into damaging effects like Spike Growth, or into an area like a Moonbeam or a Spirit Guardians where they'll have to start their turn in it then. So I think this isn't as good, but I think this is good enough to warrant an A, especially since it does let you boost your dexterity. And the final two, we get a bit of a psionic theme going into them. Telekinetic first. You get to increase your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma by +1. You learn the Mage Hand cantrip. However, it is invisible by default, and well, you can make it invisible, so you can choose to. And you can cast it without verbal or somatic components. So this is similar to how the Gith have it. This also has the additional benefit of if you have Mage Hand from another source, then it increases the range by 30 feet when you cast it. So this is really nice in that even those that have Mage Hand already can improve their use, and it's a bit of a saving grace really for an Arcane Trickster that might be interested in this. Because they can already make their Mage Hand invisible, but this removes the components and it extends their reach, which can be very valuable. And finally, as a bonus action, you get to try to telekinetically shove a creature that you can see within 30 feet. So that's a bonus action. They make a strength save, DC 8, proficiency bonus, and then whatever modifier you boosted with this feat. And then if they fail, you can either move them 5 feet toward or away from you. A creature can willingly fail this save. That's important that it spells that out, because sometimes you might want to affect a teammate with something, and if it's not spelled out, the DM might make them make the save anyway. This is great because it allows you to effectively pull friends from melee range without provoking opportunity attacks, lets you pull them out of hazardous effects, or just generally kind of rework the positioning. Just for example, if you have a melee character that might not quite make it, or a ranged character that might not quite get out of harm's way, you can kind of give them a nudge. The ability to move monsters around is always potent. The fact that it's a bonus action, that it's not a spell, is very good. Strength is typically a good monster saving throw. A lot of strong boys out there. But it's still, you have a good chance of being reliable with this. The ideal use case scenario for this is if you have whatever you are boosting stat-wise with this feat as your primary stat, just to increase the chance of success with the DC. This is an excellent feat. I've used this feat multiple times in one-shots, and it's been great every single time. The half, +1 nature to it means that it's easy to fit in. The fact that you can, extract value even if you already know Mage Hand. It's just a very well designed and very useful feat that I think belongs in S. Finally, and once again, we didn't even hit an hour, right? I'm getting too cocky. I'll hit an hour in the next one probably. Telepathic is our final feat. Again, it lets you boost your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma by a +1, and it gives you two features. The first, you can speak telepathically to any creature you can see within 60 feet of you. The telepathic utterances are in a language you know, and the creature understands you only if it knows that language. Your communication doesn't give the creature the ability to respond to you telepathically. This is quite important. So this is actually more restrictive than some other telepathic abilities, where the creature just has to understand a language, and it can kind of work as a translator. This, in how it's restricted, only allows you to use this as, one-way telepathic communication if you could already communicate already. This can still be useful in times when you're stealthing, when you want to silently communicate without publicly revealing what you're talking about, or in situations like if you are a druid that is wild shaping, when you lose the ability to communicate, this allows you to still interact with your teammates. It's not my choice of how to get telepathy necessarily. The +1 does help. And secondly, you get Detect Thoughts as a spell that you can cast without a spell slot or components once per long rest. Your spellcasting ability is the one that you raised with this feat. Detect Thoughts can be a good spell. It is very DM dependent. I will say that. What is a surface thought versus what you have to dig deeper for. This is a good feat overall for fulfilling the fiction of somebody that has telepathy. I think it is a little bit needless that they nerfed the telepathy versus other ones. I think this is a good feat that it's worthy of a B. I don't think it's good enough to put an A, but I've had players take it and have a lot of fun with it, and it has proved useful. I just think that it could be, and probably should be, a touch better if it was going to get that A tier. So, that's what I think. What do you think? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Where would you put these feats? Let me know in the comments section down below. Whilst you're down there, why don't you hit that like button and that subscribe button? Maybe even smash that notification bell or whatever people say you do with that one, because it does greatly help the channel, helps us grow, helps us keep this content coming for you. But until next time, I've been Paul, and I will see you in the next video. That definitely won't be an hour long either.